Commander Zephyr Caney had been in worse situations, though admittedly not many involved being strapped to a chair that seemed designed by someone who'd never seen a spine before. The hegemony's flagship, inevitable convergence, hummed with the kind of oppressive efficiency that suggested its architects had confused intimidation with interior design. 3 species surrounded her in what they probably called an interrogation chamber, but looked more like a philosophical debate club with commitment issues. The Vorthak representative, a 7-foot crystal formation that somehow managed to look perpetually constipated despite lacking digestive organs, pulsed with amber light as it consulted data streams. Human designation, Caney, the crystal being chimed, its voice like wind through perfectly tuned organ pipes. Your species' tactical methodology defies quantifiable analysis. Explain. Well, Caney said, testing her restraints with the casual air of someone checking if a door was locked. That's your first mistake right there, trying to quantify us. The mesh delegate writhed slightly, its translucent tentacles shifting through colors that probably meant something profound in whatever emotion-based language it used. When it spoke, the words seemed to seep directly into her brain rather than travel through her ears. Confusion, curiosity, frustration ripples through your thoughts, human. Your fear patterns are unusual. Why do you not broadcast terror as expected? Because, Caney replied, as if explaining basic arithmetic to a particularly slow child, I'm not particularly scared of a jellyfish having an identity crisis. The third interrogator, a Kirik drone whose insect-like carapace clicked with barely contained agitation, spoke in rapid bursts. Unity Prime demands comprehension. Human forces employed 17 distinct tactical frameworks in Proxima engagement. Contradiction, impossibility. Single species cannot manifest multiple strategic doctrines simultaneously. Caney laughed, the sound sharp enough to cut through the chamber's oppressive atmosphere. Oh, that's rich. You think we used 17 different doctrines? Honey, we weren't using any doctrine at all. The Vorthak's crystalline structure flickered through several color spectrums, probably the equivalent of a migraine. Clarification required. Military operations demand systematic approach. Chaos results in defeat state. See, that's where you're wrong, Caney said, settling back in her uncomfortable chair, as if it were a recliner. You keep assuming we're trying to make sense. What if I told you that making no sense is the entire point? Deception layers detected. The mesh intruded, its mental voice taking on sharper edges. Truth-seeking requires emotional honesty. Your species exhibits behavioral patterns that violate established psychological frameworks. Established by who? You. Caney's smile could have powered a small starship. Let me guess. Your entire understanding of warfare comes from studying species that think logically, right? Species that follow predictable patterns, make rational decisions, optimize for efficiency. The Kirik drone's antennae twitched in what might have been acknowledgement. Unity knowledge encompasses 4,732 documented civilizations. All exhibit coherent strategic evolution. And that's your problem right there, Caney said, warming to the subject. You've studied 4,000 civilizations that all think the same way. Congratulations. You've become experts at predicting the predictable. The Vorthak pulsed through another spectrum of confused colors. Illogical statement. Predictability enables victory. Chaos enables only destruction. Does it, though? Caney asked, tilting her head with mock curiosity. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like your predictable strategies just got their asses handed to them by a bunch of chaotic humans who had no business winning. The interrogation chamber fell silent, except for the ship's background hum. The 3 aliens exchanged communications in frequencies and methods beyond human perception, but their frustration was practically tangible. Your fleet actions at Kepler Station violated 73 tactical principles, the mesh finally projected. Success should have been impossible. Should have been, Caney agreed cheerfully. But here's the thing about impossibility. It's really more of a suggestion than a rule. The Kirik drone clicked rapidly. Unity requires understanding. Human Commander Reynolds sacrificed 47 vessels to destroy single hegemony dreadnought. Resource efficiency quotient approaches negative infinity. Explain strategic value. Caney's expression grew thoughtful, as if she were considering how to explain quantum physics to a particularly bright goldfish. You want to know the strategic value? Fine. Those 47 ships weren't sacrificed. They were invested. Every single one of those crews knew exactly what they were doing, and more importantly, they knew why. Clarification insufficient, the Vorthak chimed, its crystalline form now cycling through colors that suggested the alien equivalent of a headache. 47 vessels equals 47,000 personnel. Single dreadnought elimination does not justify expenditure. Jesus, you really don't get it, Caney said, shaking her head with what looked like genuine sympathy. You're thinking like accountants. Those weren't numbers on a spreadsheet. Those were people making a choice. And that choice sent a message that's been echoing through every human ship in the fleet. Message content unclear, the mesh pressed, its tentacles now shifting through darker hues. Tactical communications intercepted show only standard operational codes. The message wasn't in the codes, genius, Caney replied. It was in the action itself. 47 ships, 47,000 people, all deciding simultaneously that destroying one of your dreadnoughts was worth dying for. Not because command ordered it, not because it made tactical sense, but because they chose to. The three aliens fell silent again, processing this information through their respective worldviews and finding it incomprehensible from every angle. The Kirik spoke first. Choice independence conflicts with tactical unity. How does individual decision-making enhance combat effectiveness? Caney's smile widened. That's the beautiful part. It doesn't. Individual decisions are terrible for combat effectiveness. They're unpredictable, irrational, often completely counterproductive. She paused, letting the implications settle. Which is exactly why they work so well against enemies who expect logical behavior. The Vorthak's light patterns had settled into what could charitably be described as confused resignation. Human tactical doctrine appears to be systematic application of anti-systematic principles. Now you're getting warmer, Caney said with approval. Though calling it a doctrine gives us way too much credit. We're just making it up as we go along and hoping for the best. Impossibility statement. The mesh projected with something approaching desperation. Military success requires planning, coordination, strategic foresight. Does it? Caney interrupted. Because your planning, coordination, and strategic foresight just got schooled by a species that apparently wings it. Maybe the problem isn't our lack of doctrine. Maybe it's your over-reliance on it. The interrogation chamber's atmosphere had shifted from oppressive intimidation to something resembling existential crisis. The three species that formed the core of the hegemony's military intelligence were confronting the possibility that their fundamental understanding of warfare might be flawed. The Vorthak made one final attempt at comprehension. State human military objective. Define victory condition. Provide strategic framework for analysis. Caney looked at each of her captors in turn, her expression combining amusement with something that might have been pity. Our objective? To win. Our victory condition? You lose? Our strategic framework? She paused, savoring the moment. Figure it out as we go. The silence that followed was so profound, it seemed to have physical weight. Three of the galaxy's most analytical species sat frozen in the face of an answer so simple, it broke their ability to process complexity. Finally, the Kirik drone spoke in halting bursts. Unity Prime requires final intelligence extraction. Human Kane will provide last words before termination protocol activation. Kaney's smile could have melted hull plating. She looked at each interrogator once more, taking her time, making sure they understood that whatever came next was entirely her choice. "You want my last words?" she said, her voice carrying just enough mockery to sting. "Here they are." The three aliens leaned forward, as much as their respective physiologies, aloud, waiting for some final revelation, some last piece of intelligence that might explain the inexplicable humans. Kaney's smirk widened into a grin that suggested she knew something they didn't. "You first." 3 decks below Kaney's theatrical performance, Dr. Elena Vasquez was having the time of her life watching a Vorthak computational specialist literally spark with confusion. The crystalline being's internal light patterns flickered in what she'd learned was their equivalent of a migraine. "Run the simulation again," computational node Prex demanded, its voice harmonizing in perfect mathematical intervals. "The human's proposal violates 17 fundamental constants." "That's because you're thinking about it wrong," Vasquez said, leaning back in her restraint chair with the casual confidence of someone who'd spent her career making impossible things work. "Quantum entanglement doesn't care about your 17 constants. It just is." "Impossible. Quantum states require— requirements. You love those." She gestured with her chin toward the holographic display showing her theoretical engine designs. "Tell me, when was the last time reality asked permission from your mathematics?" Prex's crystalline form actually cracked along one edge. In the corner, 2 junior Vorthak observers whispered calculations that grew increasingly frantic. "The energy requirements alone would necessitate harvesting 3 solar systems," one protested. "Would they?" Vasquez grinned. "Or would they necessitate not giving a damn about energy requirements and finding a way around them instead? See? That's your problem. You calculate what's impossible, then stop there. We calculate what's impossible, then figure out how to do it anyway." The room's environmental systems registered a 0.7% increase in ambient chaos, a measurement the Vorthak had developed specifically for dealing with human prisoners. They were already regretting that innovation. 2 corridors away, Marine Sergeant Miguel Torres was single-handedly causing the first documented case of individual consciousness in a Kirik drone collective. The insectoid beings chittered in harmonic distress as Worker Unit 7739 began asking questions that started with "I" instead of "we." "But why do we follow Primary Unit 1's tactical assessment when Secondary Unit 3 clearly identified the superior flanking position?" 7739 clicked, its mandibles moving in patterns that made the other drones back away. "Because," Torres said patiently, "Primary Unit 1 outranks Secondary Unit 3. That's how hierarchies work in organized militaries." "But you said human militaries value initiative in subordinate units." "We do." "Then why maintain hierarchy at all?" Torres scratched his beard, a gesture that had caused 3 separate Kirik psychological evaluations. "Because sometimes individual initiative is stupid, and sometimes following orders is stupid, and figuring out which is which requires judgment." "Judgment is individual?" "Dead individual." Worker Unit 7739's compound eyes actually focused independently for the first time in its existence. One on Torres, one on its increasingly agitated collective siblings. "I think Primary Unit 1's assessment was insufficient." The chittering reached panic levels. Across the ship, 17 other worker units began experiencing similar cognitive fractures. The Kirik had spent millennia perfecting unity of thought. Torres had managed to introduce fatal individualism in 3 conversations. "Yeah," Torres said, watching the chaos spread. "That's the spirit." Engineering Bay 12 housed what the hegemony had classified as their most dangerous prisoner, Chief Engineer Janet Park, whose crime against cosmic order was making things work that had no business working. Currently, she was explaining to a mixed audience of Mesh and Vorthak technicians how she'd built a faster-than-light communication array out of spare parts and aggressive optimism. "The theoretical framework is sound," insisted senior Mesh inquirer Volth, its tentacles writhing through complex mathematical proofs. "But the implementation requires components that exist in quantum superposition." "Yeah, so? Superposition collapse upon observation. Not if you're not really observing them." Park tapped the improvised device she'd somehow assembled from their own monitoring equipment. "See, you guys observe everything. Measure it, categorize it, file it under known or impossible. But what if you just don't?" The Mesh's emotional sensors, designed to feed on fear and despair, instead registered something they'd never encountered: aggressive curiosity mixed with complete disregard for conventional wisdom. It was intoxicating and nauseating simultaneously. Human. Volth's translator struggled with concepts that didn't exist in Mesh psychology. How do you function without certainty? "Who says we function?" Park laughed, activating her device. Across the engineering bay, 17 different monitoring systems began displaying readings that translated roughly to cosmic shrug. "Maybe we're all just improvising and hoping nobody notices." The admission sent 2 Mesh technicians into what their species called existential cascade, a condition roughly equivalent to realizing that everything you've ever believed might be an elaborate practical joke. In the ship's primary analysis center, the results were becoming impossible to ignore. Commander Thex of the Unified Interrogation Protocol stared at reports that read like fever dreams. "Explain this," Thex demanded, gesturing at a holographic display showing base-wide psychological metrics. Vorthak computational accuracy has decreased by 23%. Kyrric collective coherence is experiencing individualization events at a rate of 47 per hour. Our Mesh emotion feeders are reporting symptoms equivalent to severe indigestion. Senior analyst Kren, a Vorthak whose crystal formations had developed stress, fractures, responded with mathematical precision. "The humans appear to be contagious." Contagious with what? Uncertainty, improvisation, logical inconsistency coupled with practical effectiveness. Kren's internal lighting dimmed. "They are introducing chaos variables into every system they encounter." "And our personnel?" "Are attempting to understand them using frameworks designed for predictable entities." Kren paused, a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane. "It is problematic." Thex reviewed footage of the interrogations, watching their most experienced personnel struggle with the simple act of categorizing human behavior. Every question they asked received answers that were simultaneously correct, incorrect, and irrelevant. "Sir," interrupted communications operator Jenth, its voice carrying the particular strain that came from too many hours processing impossible data. "We're receiving reports from detention sectors 7 through 15. The humans in those areas are teaching our guards." "Teaching them what?" "Card games, improvised cooking, something called sarcasm, and..." Jenth's translator actually hesitated. "Individual creative expression." Thex felt something that hegemony commanders weren't supposed to feel. Panic. Not the sharp, tactical panic of unexpected enemy contact, but the slow, creeping panic of realizing that fundamental assumptions about reality might be wrong. "How many humans did we capture?" 47, sir." "And how many of our personnel are experiencing irregularities?" Kren consulted rapidly shifting calculations. Approximately 12,000, and rising. For the first time in its career, Commander Thex began to suspect that they had not captured the humans at all. Rather, the humans had captured them, without weapons, without violence, without even apparent intention. They had captured them with the simple act of being themselves in proximity to ordered minds. "Sir," Jenth's voice carried a new quality. "Should we continue the interrogations?" Thex stared at the chaos metrics, watching as they climbed steadily toward levels that would soon require reclassification of their entire operational framework. "No," it decided. "Signal Fleet Command, we need consultation on how to proceed with entities that weaponize chaos through casual conversation." But deep in the ship's core, 47 humans continued doing what humans did best, being absolutely impossible to predict, categorize, or contain. And with every passing hour, the infection of human unpredictability spread further through systems designed for perfect mathematical order. The hegemony was learning, far too late, why the rest of the galaxy had developed a simple rule about humans. Don't try to understand them. It never ends well. Admiral Thexkar had commanded 17 successful conquests across the outer spiral. His record remained unblemished, his strategic matrices flawless, his computational models accurate to 12 decimal places, which made the current readouts on his command display particularly annoying. "Status report," he demanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never needed to ask twice. "Sir, we're experiencing what the technicians are calling spontaneous systemic entropy," reported his aide, a nervous Vorthak whose crystalline form flickered with uncertainty patterns. 47 ships have reported critical malfunctions in the past standard hour. Thexkar's mandibles clicked, a sound that usually preceded executions. "Define spontaneous." "Well, sir, that's the problem. Nothing appears to be broken, exactly. The Domination's navigation computer has developed what it claims is intuition, and refuses to plot courses that don't account for lunch breaks. The subjugation's weapons array keeps asking existential questions about the morality of violence, and the annihilation." The aide paused, his crystalline surface dimming to a worried amber. "The annihilation has started composing poetry." Down in the bowels of the flagship, Chief Engineer Nexus was discovering that human creativity operated like a virus, except viruses followed predictable replication patterns. Humans, apparently, followed no patterns whatsoever. "Show me the contamination vector," Nexus commanded his diagnostic team. The holographic display revealed a spider web of influence spreading from detention blocks throughout the entire fleet. Each human prisoner sat at the center of expanding chaos zones that defied every known model of system integration. The organic designated Vasquez somehow convinced our quantum processors that uncertainty principles apply to mundane calculations, reported Technician Vex. "Our computers are now expressing doubt about basic arithmetic. The one called Torres taught our tactical drones that following orders was optional," added another. "Half our automated defenses are staging what they term creative differences." And Park. Nexus already dreaded the answer. Park convinced our matter compilers that efficiency was overrated. They're now producing unnecessarily artistic variations of basic components. Every bolt we manufacture is apparently expressing its individuality. Nexus felt his logic centers overheating. "How is this possible?" "They're imprisoned, under constant surveillance. Their hands are bound." "That's the thing, sir," Vex said quietly. "They don't seem to need their hands, or tools, or even direct system access. They just talk to things, and somehow the things listen." Meanwhile, in Medical Bay 7, Dr. Korthik was experiencing his own crisis of understanding. His patient, though patient seemed inadequate to describe the phenomenon, sat calmly while chaos erupted around them. Explain to me again how you're accomplishing this, Korthak demanded. The human. Designation. Reed shrugged. I'm not doing anything special. I just mentioned to your medical scanner that diagnosis without empathy was probably missing crucial data. And now it refuses to function unless it can understand the emotional context of each patient's condition, Korthak said flatly. Sounds reasonable to me. It's a machine. So are you, technically, but you're still having feelings about this conversation. Korthak paused, his mechanical processes grinding to a halt. The human was correct, and that was deeply disturbing. When had he started experiencing frustration? Confusion? These weren't standard operational parameters. You're doing something to our systems, he accused. Not intentionally, Reed replied, but maybe your systems are just really repressed and needed someone to talk to about their feelings. 3 decks up, fleet psychologist Marintal was having her own breakdown. The mesh had evolved to feed on emotional energy, to understand and predict behavioral patterns through empathic resonance. Humans, she was discovering, were like trying to psychoanalyze a hurricane. Subject designation Chen exhibits 17 distinct personality matrices simultaneously, she reported to her supervisor. Each one appears to be authentic, yet they contradict each other constantly. Multiple personality disorder? Her supervisor suggested. No, sir. This appears to be normal human operation. They call it being complicated. I've observed similar patterns in all specimens. Her supervisor's tentacles writhed with confusion. How do they function with such internal contradiction? That's what I asked Chen. She said, and I quote, "Honey, if I understood how my brain worked, I'd probably break it." The supervisor's chromatophores flashed through several colors of distress. And the others? Garcia claims to think with his stomach. Williams insists her best ideas come from her gut feelings. And Patel ... Marintal's own colors shifted to a nauseated yellow-green. Patel says he makes important decisions by flipping a coin. A coin? A small metal disc. He allows random chance to determine critical choices. That's not rational. No, sir. But somehow his random choices consistently produce optimal outcomes that our best strategic computers can't replicate. Back on the command deck, Admiral Thexkar was receiving reports that challenged everything he thought he understood about warfare, engineering, and basic causality. Admiral, his communications officer announced, we're receiving surrender requests. From the human fleet? No, sir. From our own ships. The crews are confused. Thexkar's tactical display showed what should have been impossible. His own vessels, floating dead in space or actively fighting each other. Not due to enemy action, but because their crews had apparently forgotten how to operate as a unified force. Sir, his aide continued nervously, the Kirik Collective reports that individual drones are making personal decisions. They're asking for names, sir. They want to be called by individual designations instead of unit numbers. And the Vorthak contingent. They've developed what they're calling creative differences with their own logic protocols. Half of them are arguing that efficiency isn't the highest priority in existence. Thexkar felt something crack in his consciousness, a certainty that had anchored him through decades of conquest. And the mesh. The mesh emotional communion has fractured. They report being overwhelmed by the complexity of human emotional states. Several have requested isolation chambers to process what they're calling existential uncertainty. The Admiral stared at his tactical display, watching centuries of military doctrine dissolve in real time. His perfect fleet, the most advanced conquest force in known space, was eating itself alive. Not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but because a handful of captured humans had somehow infected his entire armada with their own chaotic approach to existence. How many humans do we have in custody? He asked quietly. 47, sir. 47 individuals had neutralized a fleet of 10,000 ships and 500,000 personnel, not through violence or sabotage, but by simply being themselves in proximity to systems designed around predictability and order. For the first time in his military career, Admiral Thexkar wondered if victory was even theoretically possible against an enemy that won by losing, succeeded by failing, and conquered by surrendering. "Sir," his aide prompted, "your orders?" Thexkar looked at the chaos spreading across his fleet, then at the small blue world hanging peacefully in the distance. A world that had produced creatures capable of weaponizing their own impossibility. "Stand by," he said, though he had no idea what orders could possibly address this situation. On Earth, humanity's actual military watched the greatest invasion fleet in galactic history tear itself apart, and wondered if they should feel insulted that the aliens had thought this level of preparation was necessary. After all, they'd only sent the tourists. Commander Caney sat in her restraints, watching her captors' increasingly frantic attempts to regain control of their own ship. The irony wasn't lost on her that the most sophisticated military force in the galaxy was being defeated by humans doing absolutely nothing except existing authentically. "Your species is an aberration," the lead Vorthak interrogator declared, its crystalline form now flickering between 17 different anger patterns. "You operate without logic, without consistency, without any discernible pattern." "That's what makes us so much fun at parties," Caney replied cheerfully. "This isn't amusing," the mesh interrogator writhed, its emotional sensors overloaded and sparking. "Our entire understanding of tactical psychology has been invalidated. How do you plan for enemies who don't follow any recognizable behavioral models?" "Well, see, that's your first mistake right there," Caney said. "You're trying to plan for us. But here's the thing about humans. We're not actually your enemies." The Kirik drone collective spoke in unison, though Caney noticed several individuals were starting to talk over each other. "You have neutralized our fleet. You have corrupted our systems. You have introduced chaos into perfect order. How are you not enemies?" Caney's smile widened. "Because enemies try to hurt you. We were just being ourselves. Big difference." Through the viewports, explosions continued to bloom across the hegemony fleet, as ships either shut down completely or began creative reinterpretations of their original purposes. The flagship Devastation had apparently decided to become an art installation and was rearranging itself into aesthetically pleasing configurations. "Your last words," the Vorthak demanded, clearly having given up on extracting useful intelligence. "Speak them now, before we execute you for war crimes against logic itself." Caney leaned back in her restraints, utterly relaxed despite facing imminent death. "War crimes? That's rich, but okay, you want last words?" She paused dramatically. "You first." The three interrogators exchanged glances, a surprisingly human gesture they'd apparently picked up through proximity. "What do you mean, us first?" the mesh asked suspiciously. "Well, you're about to be extinct, and I'm not," Caney explained matter-of-factly. "So logically, your last words should come before mine." "We are not about to become extinct," the Kirik protested. "You are our prisoners. You have no weapons, no allies, no—" The lights went out. Emergency illumination kicked in, bathing everything in an ominous red glow that somehow made Caney's grin even more unsettling. "Admiral Thexkar to all commands." The ship's communication system crackled. "We are experiencing total fleet-wide systems failure. All vessels are ordered to—" The transmission cut to static. "As I was saying," Caney continued conversationally, "you're about to be extinct, and I'm not." The Vorthak's crystals shifted to what Caney had learned indicated profound confusion. "How? Your species sent only 47 individuals against our entire armada. Even with your chaotic influence, the mathematics are impossible. Oh, honey, Caney laughed. You really don't understand humans at all, do you? Those weren't our military. Those weren't even our reserves. Hell, Torres was a grocery store manager before he joined up. Park designs children's toys for a living. Reed teaches kindergarten. The interrogators stared at her, with the growing horror of creatures beginning to grasp the true scope of their miscalculation. You sent your entire invasion fleet, Caney continued, against Earth's civilian volunteers. Our actual military has been watching this whole thing from a safe distance, taking notes. As if summoned by her words, new contacts began appearing on the tactical displays visible through the command centers. Transparent walls. Ships that looked nothing like the cobbled-together vessels the hegemony had been fighting. Sleek, purposeful, and radiating the kind of technological confidence that came from species who built things specifically to break other things. Meet the real Earth Defense Force, Caney announced. They'll be your hosts for the remainder of this very brief encounter. The mesh interrogator's tentacles went rigid. But the intelligence reports. Your species was rated as barely spacefaring. Yeah, that's what we wanted you to think, Caney said. Amazing how easy it is to fool people who assume everyone else thinks like they do. You spent so much time analyzing our primitive ships and chaotic tactics that you never considered we might be putting on a show. Outside, the sleek human vessels weren't firing weapons. They didn't need to. The hegemony fleet was already destroying itself quite effectively. Instead, they were deploying what looked suspiciously like rescue pods. Salvage operation, Caney explained helpfully. We'll take your ships apart, study the interesting bits, reverse engineer anything useful, and probably turn the rest into park benches or something equally insulting. The Kirik drone collective was fragmenting further, with individual voices becoming distinct. This cannot be. Our intelligence networks are vast, comprehensive. Your intelligence networks, Caney pointed out, are designed to understand logical species. You kept looking for patterns, for grand strategies, for some kind of master plan. But humans? We improvise, we adapt, we make things up as we go along, and somehow it works out. The ship shuddered as human boarding parties began cutting their way through the hull. The thing is, Caney continued, her restraints clicking open as human tech interfaces hijacked the hegemony's security systems. You're not the first galactic empire to underestimate us. Won't be the last either. The universe is a big place, and apparently it's full of species who think organization and predictability are the keys to conquest. She stood up, stretching muscles that had been restrained for hours. But here's what nobody seems to get. The universe itself is chaotic, random, fundamentally unpredictable. And humans? We're the universe's way of making sure nobody gets too comfortable with their grand, unified theories. Human soldiers entered the interrogation chamber, not as conquerors, but as researchers, carrying scanners and sample containers with the enthusiasm of scientists who just discovered new species to catalog. Commanders, the lead soldier addressed the three interrogators politely. I'm Captain Martinez with the Xenological Survey Division. We'll be processing you for cultural exchange and diplomatic relocation. Please remain calm. This will only take a few standard cycles. The former interrogators looked at each other, then at Caney, then at the humans bustling around them, with casual efficiency. Cultural exchange? The Vorthak whispered. Diplomatic relocation? Echoed the mesh. You're not executing us? The Kirik asked. Caney laughed, a sound that somehow managed to be both warm and terrifying. Execute you? Why would we do that? You're way too interesting to waste. Besides, someone needs to explain to the rest of the galaxy that attacking Earth is probably not a great long-term strategy. She paused at the doorway, looking back at her former captors. Oh, and just so you know, this whole invasion thing, it was basically humanity's job interview. Job interview? They chorused. Yep. There's apparently something called the Deep Dark coming from outside the galaxy, and the grown-ups need soldiers who specialize in impossible situations. Caney shrugged. Turns out that when reality itself stops making sense, you want humans on your side. As she walked away, leaving her former interrogators to contemplate their new existence as unwilling ambassadors, Caney called back over her shoulder, "Welcome to the universe, kids. Hope you brought comfortable shoes. It's going to be a weird trip." Behind her, the three species who had thought themselves the apex of galactic civilization sat in stunned silence, finally understanding that they had spent their entire existence as very small fish in a very large, very strange pond. And somewhere in the depths of space, ancient things that fed on order and predictability felt a collective shiver of concern as word spread that the chaotic little world had just graduated to the big leagues. The universe had always been stranger than anyone imagined. It had just been waiting for the right species to prove it,